Hi, I'm Belle. I set the salad down and reached for my seat, but my mother-in-law didn't even blink before sneering, "The help doesn't eat with family." And in that moment I realized they never saw me as one of them. Not a daughter. Not even a person. Just a tool. What they didn't know was that the help they looked down on owned the resort they were eating in, and that was just the beginning. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are right now? And have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family? Drop a comment. Let's talk. Because this story gets much, much worse. The glass doors to the Ocean View Haven private dining suite reflected the amber glow of the early evening sun. I adjusted the pearl pin on my blazer one last time, checked the placement of the final salad plate, and stepped back. The linens were crisp, the wine glasses aligned like soldiers. Everything was perfect. Of course it was. This was my resort. But tonight, I wasn't the host. Not officially. Tonight belonged to the Brants, Calder's family, and to them, I was just around. I moved toward the table, quiet, composed. The staff had finished their part and left the room humming with polite conversation, the clinking of forks against china. I reached for the last tray of chilled salad and placed it in front of Mrs. Brant. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she scanned the room, counting guests, adjusting her expression like she was about to cue a Broadway show. The seats were filling quickly. I saw my name card. It was at the far end of the table, barely in view, tucked near the service door. Still, I walked over and gently pulled out my chair. The moment the legs scraped the floor, her voice cut through the room like a serrated knife. The help doesn't eat with family. It wasn't said with volume. It didn't need volume. Silence rushed in. Forks paused mid-air. Calder shifted in his seat. And me? I didn't move. Not at first. I just stood there, one hand still on the back of the chair. Every muscle in my body told me to sit, to smile, to let it slide. But I knew that tone. The tone of a woman who'd always seen me as less than, and now she wanted the room to agree. I let go of the chair. My eyes scanned the table. Alawan caught my glance and smirked, lips wine-stained, fingers tapping against her glass like she was keeping tempo with my humiliation. Across from her, a cousin I barely knew glanced down awkwardly at his plate. Calder said nothing, not a word. He looked at me, then away, like this wasn't his moment to interrupt, like I wasn't his wife. I inhaled quietly, controlled. The scent of grilled sea bass and rosemary bread drifted around me. It should have smelled like comfort. It didn't. My fingers brushed the edge of my place setting. I lifted the napkin, not to wipe a tear or dab at some imagined emotion. I folded it, slowly, purposefully, into a lotus. It was something I'd learned from a guest once, an older woman from Kyoto. She'd said the lotus represented calm in chaos. I didn't say a word, didn't make a scene. I placed the napkin on my plate, nodded to no one in particular, and walked away. The hallway outside was cool, the overhead sconces casting soft shadows on the textured walls. I passed by a mirrored panel, caught a glimpse of myself. I looked fine, controlled, but inside, something stirred. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't shock, it was clarity. I turned the corner toward the staff entrance to the kitchen. Out of habit, perhaps, years of stepping aside, blending in, letting Calder and his family shine. But I stopped short when I heard footsteps. A young staff member, Marco, came walking toward me, holding a clipboard. He paused, straightened his posture. "Good evening, Mrs. Marin," he said with respect. "All departments are reporting smooth operations tonight. Would you like the wine storage checked again before closing?" I blinked, then smiled. "No, Marco," I said quietly. "Everything's perfect." He gave a respectful nod and disappeared down the hallway. And just like that, the balance shifted. Back in the dining suite, I'd been dismissed like background noise. But out here? Out here, my name meant something. My ownership wasn't in my last name. It wasn't in Calder's lack of spine. It was in the contract that gave me 51% of Ocean View Haven. The signature on the staff paychecks, the vision behind the pool layout, the private cabanas, the triple insulated windows that made sure every room stayed silent, no matter how loud the waves roared outside. And yet, I was the one called help. I exhaled softly. The help doesn't eat with family? I murmured under my breath, a faint laugh slipping out. Good to know. I walked toward the outdoor deck, heels clicking softly against the tile. Once I stepped onto the wooden boards, I paused and slipped off my shoes. The boards were warm from the sun, the breeze salty with the scent of dusk and coral bloom. The pool shimmered, blue and gold, under the overhead lanterns. A couple of guests from a wedding party were taking photos by the palm tree arch, unaware that the owner of the place had just been exiled from her own dinner. I moved toward the edge of the pool, sat down and dipped my toes into the water. Not out of drama, out of intention. I needed the calm. I needed the cold clarity of water against skin. I thought about the years I'd poured into this place. While Calder played golf and his mother arranged luncheons, I'd fought with city permits, negotiated renovation budgets, and handpicked every supplier. And yet she still saw me as less. Maybe because I wasn't born into their world. Maybe because I never needed to be. Out here, with the soft music drifting from the speakers and the moon casting broken reflections on the water's surface, something solidified in me. They wanted to remind me of my place? Fine, but they'd forgotten who built the foundation under every plate on that table. I didn't leave that dinner in shame. I left with a plan. I stepped out of that dining room not with shame, but with a plan. That night, I didn't return to the suite until well past midnight. I stayed near the shoreline, sitting barefoot by the water where the moonlight slipped across the sand like silver ribbon. I listened to the hush of the ocean and let it rinse the sting off my skin. But I didn't cry. Not once. Not anymore. By 5:30 the next morning, I was awake. My mind hadn't rested for more than 2 hours, and my body felt it. But clarity sometimes doesn't come with comfort. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat down at the walnut writing desk near the window. The leather folder was right where I had left it in the drawer. I pulled it out slowly, unfolded the thick sheets of paper, and laid my palm over the title page like it was sacred. Resort Property, Ocean View Haven Holdings, LLC. And there it was, in bold letters near the center, Belle Marin. 51% ownership stake. I ran my finger across my name like tracing a scar I'd earned. It had been nearly a year since I wired the full amount, my entire inheritance from Aunt Ray, into the account to save the resort from default. Back then, Mrs. Brandt and Calder had been whispering about silent investors, and I'd stepped in. Ray always believed in me. She used to say, "A quiet woman doesn't mean a powerless one, darling." That inheritance was supposed to be for a future I hadn't figured out yet. Instead, it had kept Calder's family name from tumbling down the pages of Florida's bankruptcy records. And now, they wanted to pretend I was the help? I didn't shut the folder. I left it open, centered neatly on the desk, as sunlight began crawling up over the ocean horizon. A knock rattled the suite door around 7:15 a.m., too early for housekeeping. I didn't flinch. I already knew who it would be. When I opened it, there stood Mrs. Brandt in full makeup and pearls, with Calder just behind her, still in linen pants and half-buttoned shirt, like he'd rolled out of bed without even pretending to care. "Good morning," she said, smiling as if the night before hadn't happened. "We thought we'd come by and smooth out any tension from dinner." "Tension?" I said, stepping aside so they could enter. "Oh, you mean when I was told I'm the help in my own home?" Mrs. Brandt chuckled softly, brushing it off with a wave. "Oh, darling, you took that the wrong way. Alawan was just being playful. You know how she is." I walked back toward the writing desk, her eyes following me. "So," she continued, "we've been thinking about a few updates to the West Wing. Maybe bringing in a new design team, refreshing the facade. The family wants to modernize it before peak season." "By the family, you mean yourself?" I said, sitting down slowly. "And this would be happening when?" "Soon. We've already sent a few documents to Mr. Reiner to move it along, just small changes. We'd love your support." I looked at Calder. He was staring out the window like he wasn't part of this conversation, just a guest in his own marriage. Mrs. Brandt added, a little more sharply now, "What we don't want is interference. We need decisions streamlined." I smiled then, soft, controlled, and turned the folder around so it faced them. "I absolutely agree," I said, "so let's make sure we're clear on who makes the decisions." I tapped the deed. She stared at it for a second too long, the color draining from her face in measured inches. Calder stepped forward, squinting at the document like he hadn't seen it before. This is your name," he muttered. "Yes," I said. "It's been mine since last March." Mrs. Brandt tried to recover. "But that was never the intent. It was meant to be temporary. Calder's name should have been on—" "But it's not," I interrupted calmly. "And before you get any bright ideas about transferring property under the family trust, I'd advise against that. It would require my signature, and I don't recall being asked." Silence folded over the room like a heavy drape. Then I stood and said, "If you're done here, I have a call with someone who actually represents me." They didn't stay long after that. By noon, I was in downtown Miami, walking into the offices of Hallen and Wade. My attorney, Celia Hallen, greeted me in a tailored navy blazer and flats. No nonsense, as always. She'd seen my text at dawn and cleared her afternoon. "Let me guess," she said as she closed her office door. "They're trying to write you out." I handed her a copy of the trust amendment they'd tried to slide through last month, sent via courier without a word. I hadn't signed it. "Good thing you didn't," Celia said after a few minutes of reading. "They were attempting to list the resort as part of the Brandt family estate without transferring consent. If that went through, you could have lost authority over key financial decisions." "And renovations?" I asked. "Legally, no changes over $5,000 can proceed without full stakeholder approval. You're the majority. That means they need your permission." I leaned back, breathing in through my nose. "Then draft a letter," I said, "and make it official. No ownership shift, no renovations, not without written authorization from me." Celia nodded. "You want to play hardball?" "No," I said. "I want them to know the game isn't theirs anymore." That evening, just before sunset, I returned to the resort. I didn't head up to the suite. I went straight to the fire pit near the front deck, where the palm trees swayed and guests sipped cocktails by the sea. I sat alone, the legal document sealed in a courier envelope on the table beside me. Half an hour later, Calder walked by, holding a paper in his hand. He looked pale. Elowen was 2 steps behind him, trying to peek over his shoulder. They'd read it. He didn't say a word, just kept walking, his eyes refusing to meet mine. Elowen, though, lingered. She took a photo of the notice, probably planning to send it to her friends and spin it somehow. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. "This is just business stuff," she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Nothing serious." Then she looked at me, more quietly, and added, "What exactly are you planning?" I didn't respond, because by then, I already knew the next move. Instead, I slid the phone face down on the edge of the nightstand and stood up. The air in the suite still held the aftertaste of yesterday's confrontation. Legal documents, frozen smiles, and Mrs. Brandt's stiff retreat down the hall. But this morning, the weight in my chest wasn't dread. It was clarity. I got dressed slow and purposeful. Not for show. No heels, no glitter. Just a pressed linen blouse, navy slacks, hair brushed back in a low twist. The kind of look that says, "I came to be heard, not seen." When I stepped out of the suite and made my way toward the cafe, something had shifted. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Gavin, the resort's head concierge, saw me walking toward the patio tables and didn't just nod like usual. He actually walked out from behind the desk and approached with a clean, folded napkin in hand, pulled a chair out for me, set the napkin across my lap, and said with a steady voice, "Chamomile with lemon, right, Mrs. Marin?" I blinked once, then smiled. "Exactly right, Gavin. Thank you." He didn't say more, just gave the faintest smile before stepping back. It was subtle, but enough for Elowen, who entered the cafe moments later, to catch the moment in full. She was dressed in one of her signature pastel sheath dresses, hair curled just so, pearl studs glinting under the early sun. Her heels clicked too sharply on the tiles. I glanced up as she approached and saw it, the twitch in her left cheek. She saw Gavin stand straighter as I took my tea, and he didn't turn to greet her. She masked it quickly. "Oh, there you are," she chirped, walking up like we'd never shared that chilly exchange yesterday. "I thought we could start the week with a united front. There's a lunch planned today. A couple of travel influencers, over 5 million followers between them. They're interested in highlighting ocean view. Calder thought we should all join." I stirred my tea. "A peaceful front, is that it?" Her smile stayed intact, but her eyes didn't match it. "Well, you know, optics. It helps if we all look like we work together." "Fine," I said. "I'll attend." Her eyes flicked down to the deed folder I'd left visible on my table. "Of course," she replied, voice breezy. "After all, you are our investor." Then she tilted her head, added sweetly, "Though Belle hasn't worked in hospitality before, she's still learning the nuance of luxury clientele." I didn't flinch, just took another sip, and when Gavin returned to refill my hot water, he asked if I wanted an extra slice of lemon without once glancing at her. That lunch was something out of a curated dream. The influencers, young, dazzling, scripted, took selfies mid-salad, narrated the view like it was an ad campaign. Calder played host, charming and polished, sliding effortlessly between compliments and business nods. Elowen, ever the orchestrator, laughed a bit too hard and peppered in comments like, "We built this place with vision and grit," or "We believe in family values, don't we, Belle?" I let her run the show. I answered when addressed, nodded where needed, but never interrupted. It was the silence that made her most nervous, especially when one of the influencers asked, "Who actually owns the place?" Elowen jumped in. "Well, it's a family affair. We all contribute in our way." I met the influencer's eyes across the table. "She owns the majority stake," I said, voice even. 51%. You could have heard the wind catch in Elowen's throat, but she didn't correct me. She just lifted her wine and gave a forced little chuckle. She's such a numbers person. After the meal, I excused myself. The hallway near the staff kitchen was quiet. I was headed toward the east wing when I heard quick steps behind me. Elowen. "Don't get too comfortable," she hissed under her breath. "You might have paperwork, but this place, it breathes my name." I didn't turn around. Instead, I paused near the employee break room, glanced over my shoulder, and replied calmly, "Then let's see whose name the staff whisper when no one's listening." She blinked. That tiny, stunned silence gave me more satisfaction than any shouting match ever could. Then she stormed off, brushing past Marla, one of the longtime housekeepers, who happened to be carrying fresh linens. Marla stopped, bowed her head slightly toward me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Marin." Not to Elowen, just me. And that was all it took. Later that evening, I got a call from Calder. He sounded tight, like someone trying to hold it together on a fraying thread. "Did you change the expense authorizations for maintenance?" he asked. I was by the fireplace outside, watching twilight spill across the pool deck. "I restricted large purchases pending written approval," I answered evenly. "Standard for majority owners." There was a pause. "I didn't realize you were planning to enforce it." "I am." He cleared his throat. "You could have told me. You could have told me about the trust document changes your mother tried to sneak through." Silence. We hung up soon after. At 9:30 that night, I was invited quietly to a brief meeting in the staff lounge. Gavin and Marla were waiting. They'd pulled the blinds. "We're not trying to cause tension," Gavin started, "but we've worked here a long time. We saw how she treats people, like we're invisible. You saw us." I didn't make a speech. I just nodded. My hands were clasped, and for once I let the tired in my eyes show. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." When I got back to the suite, I found a forwarded RSVP email in my inbox. The name jumped out immediately. Travis Brandt, Calder's cousin, a real estate developer who'd made headlines last year bulldozing 2 historic hotels in Palm Beach. Alawan had invited him, no mention of it to me, but I remembered Travis, the way he once looked at Ocean View with hungry eyes. I stared at the screen for a long second, then closed the laptop. If she's bringing family into this, I murmured, my voice low, so will I. I called my brother-in-law next, because if she was assembling an army, I wasn't standing alone. But I didn't press send just yet, because just as my thumb hovered over the screen, I heard footsteps, measured, confident, echoing across the polished lobby tiles like someone arriving to claim what was already theirs. Brian Landon. He strolled in as if he owned the coast itself, expensive loafers that had never seen sand, blazer sleeves pushed up like he was here to relax, but make business happen anyway. His handshake with Calder lingered long enough for a photographer, and when his eyes landed on me, he tilted his head, offered a passing smile, and then said, straight-faced, "Housekeeping's gotten stylish." He said it with a chuckle, like he expected me to join in. Calder's laugh came half a beat too late, tight, hollow. "She's not," he began, but Brian had already moved on, dropping jargon like rebranding opportunity, luxury footprint, and market repositioning as he slapped a rolled-up architectural print against the concierge desk. I stood behind him, not a word, but memorizing every syllable. He didn't even realize I was in the room, and that was his mistake. Later that afternoon, I was headed back toward the administrative wing when I caught Gavin eyeing me from across the courtyard. His face didn't change, but as I passed by the side entrance, he slipped something into my palm without stopping. A key. Old brass, slightly bent at the teeth, with a faded tag, "Archives, do not enter." I paused under the archway, turning it over in my hand. Gavin's voice came softly from behind. "Found it tucked inside a maintenance drawer Elowen had marked off limits. Figured it wasn't meant for her eyes only." I nodded once. He didn't need to say more. Just before sunset, when the rest of the guests were distracted with cocktails and poolside canapes, I made my way through the back corridor that connected the staff kitchen to the oldest part of the resort. Most of it had been sealed off years ago, supposedly due to humidity damage, but I remembered this wing. My father used to let me rollerblade down these halls after hours, before guest check-in. I'd crash into walls laughing while he and the staff rearranged furniture for the next day's events. The door at the far end had a thick layer of dust along the frame, and it took 2 hard turns of the key to unlock it. Inside, the air was dry but stale. The smell of aged paper and mildew hung heavy, like time had pooled in here and never left. Metal file cabinets lined the walls. Stacks of storage boxes sagged under their own weight. There was no light switch, only the soft gray spill of daylight from a broken panel above. I opened the first drawer. Menus, guest logs, nothing useful. The second had envelopes, thick ones, each stamped with department seals, each with initials I recognized. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a stack of folded linens in the corner, a leather-bound journal, edges warped from humidity. The cover had no title, just my father's handwriting on a label, "Financial Personnel Legacy Accounts." My hands trembled as I flipped it open. Payoffs to inspectors, signed off by Elowen, side deals brokered with Brian Landon, development rights sold off in slivers, cleverly disguised under umbrella entities, and then a scanned signature, my father's, on a land parcel transfer that had occurred months after he died. I stopped breathing. Taped beside it was a contract. Coastal expansion authorization, dated 2 weeks after his funeral. The ink looked fresh, too fresh, and below it, scribbled as the witness, Alawan Brandt. The walls felt tighter. My face burned, not from rage, but from the realization that while I was picking out his headstone, she was forging his name. I staggered back and nearly bumped into an old supply cart behind me. "Didn't expect anyone to be in here," came a low, gravelly voice behind me. I turned sharply. Alexei, the handyman who used to sneak me juice boxes when I was 9. He looked thinner now, hair all white, eyes clouded but still alert. He stepped forward slowly, leaned on the doorframe. "I kept that journal hidden," he said. "Your dad told me, if anything ever feels off, don't burn the past. Protect it." I didn't know who'd come back, but you did. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came. He added, "You always said hello, even when your mother told you not to talk to the help." He gave a sad chuckle. "We all remember." I nodded, eyes stinging. "Thank you, Alexei." "I'll be around," he said, stepping out, "if you need help remembering more." That night, back in my room, I scanned every page of that ledger onto a secure drive, every signature, every document. I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry either, because I wasn't going to use it just yet. The world doesn't shift from whispers. It shifts from voices caught on microphones, cameras, public settings where power masks crack under pressure. And Elowen? She loved attention more than control. The next morning, Calder came to my room holding a sleek black envelope. His voice was gentle, but his eyes carried the weight of yet another apology he couldn't say out loud. "Mom's hosting a legacy dinner on Thursday," he said. "Themes, founders and future." He cleared his throat. "She asked if you'd join the staff table. You know, buffet side." I held his gaze, not flinching. Then I smiled, slow and calm. "Tell her thank you. I'd be honored to sit with the people who actually built this place." He blinked. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Because when the curtains lift that night, and the lights are just bright enough to catch a shadow, she'll see the legacy she tried to erase, sitting right where she never expected. I wore my plainest dress, soft gray cotton, no embellishments, no shimmer. I brushed my hair back into a simple twist and left my earrings on the vanity. I didn't need shine. That night, I needed silence. Focus. The hallway to the grand ballroom echoed with distant laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. As I approached, a young staffer with a clipboard glanced up and gestured without hesitation. "Staff seating's over here," she said, motioning toward a narrow cluster of round tables tucked beside the kitchen swing doors. I didn't argue, just walked where she pointed. The room itself was a performance, chandeliers catching every movement, women glittering like holiday windows, and a long central table stretching like a runway. A gold-framed sign read, "Founders and Visionaries," and there, under a halo of floral arrangements and imported crystal, sat Elowen, draped in a shimmering midnight gown that hugged her like it had been sewn onto her ego. Calder sat to her right, stiff in a tailored tux that looked like it belonged to someone else. I pulled out a chair beside Chef Paloma's apprentice. He looked up, startled, then immediately tried to offer me his seat, mumbling, "Ms. Marin, I didn't know—" I stopped him with a smile. "Then let's both sit, and eat like family." Chef Paloma herself peeked around the door a few minutes later, whispering in my ear while pretending to adjust a napkin. "They told me not to plate your entree, said salad was enough." She paused, eyes soft. "You want me to sneak you something?" I reached across the table and broke my bread roll in half, handing it to the apprentice. "We'll make do. It's not the food I came for." And it wasn't. I scanned the room. Brian Landon was laughing at something a city councilman said, his loafers propped on the leg of a gold chair like he owned the carpet. His voice carried easily, the kind that filled a room even when it said nothing worth hearing. The first course came, then a second. I was still nibbling the olives from my salad when Elowen stood. She tapped her spoon against her glass, and the room slowly fell into hush. "Tonight," she began, her voice smooth as syrup, "we honor resilience. We honor legacy. We honor those who held this place together when the waves tried to swallow it." There were soft claps, a few murmurs of agreement. When our family nearly lost this resort, Calder and I stood firm. Together we weathered storms, financial, structural, personal, because this place runs through our bloodline. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't move, didn't blink. Then Brian raised his glass. "To Elowen," he called out, standing with just enough swagger to draw attention, "the woman who salvaged a sinking ship, A true Marin. Some board members followed. Others hesitated. A few looked at me. One even looked away. Calder didn't stand. He just stared at his wine. I felt the shift then, the subtle winding of the knife. A moment later, it came. As the final course was cleared from the long table, a server appeared beside mine and reached for my plate, while I was still holding my fork. He hesitated, obviously uncomfortable, but I nodded, allowing him to take it. Elowen's laugh rang out. "Oh, don't mind. The help doesn't usually eat with family. That's tradition." There was no mistaking her meaning. The room turned. It didn't explode. No gasp, no shouting. Just silence. One of those thick, awkward silences that makes even a silver spoon sound loud against a tablecloth. I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my plain gray dress. Then I stepped away from the table. At the edge of the ballroom, near the silent musicians waiting for their cue, I found her, the assistant of the mayor's wife. We'd spoken briefly at the lobby bar 2 weeks ago, when she dropped her phone and I returned it. I handed her a small silver USB drive. "Just make sure she sees it," I said simply. She nodded, puzzled. Then I walked toward the microphone. No one called out, no one blocked me, not even Elowen. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted it slightly, and looked at her. Then I smiled, not the kind of smile people wear for cameras, the kind you give someone right before you walk away forever. I didn't say a word, just turned and left the ballroom. It didn't take long. The first ping came just as I reached the lobby, then another, and another, notifications lighting up across the room like fireflies in a dry field. I didn't look back, but I could hear it building. "Is this real? Who posted this? That's her signature. Look at the date." I walked past the concierge, through the archway and into the cool night air. I had copies of every page, scanned, filed, time-stamped, the forged documents. The land transfer papers dated 6 months after my father's funeral. The payoff notes. The text chain between Brian and Elowen joking about inspectors who didn't look too closely. The truth was out. Quietly, cleanly. I was almost to the parking lot when I heard him. "Belle!" I paused but didn't turn. "Belle, wait!" I turned slowly. Calder was half jogging toward me, his jacket unbuttoned, tie askew. He looked like a man who'd just realized his anchor had come loose. You knew?" he panted. "All this time?" I looked at him, at his face, at the worry that had finally caught up with him. Then I said quietly, "You did too, Calder. You just chose not to see it." And with that, I walked to my car. The night wasn't over, but the silence that followed was finally mine. I lay still as the first trace of morning filtered through the sheer curtains. The resort was unusually quiet, except for the faint hum of news vans already setting up outside. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen lit up. 45 missed calls, most from unknown numbers, a few from Elowen, one from Calder, and then a text from Chef Paloma. "Some of us always knew, thank you." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that not everyone had been blind. I got up and moved toward the balcony. A reporter across the lawn caught sight of me and lifted his camera. I didn't flinch. Let them take the shot. Let them wonder why the so-called outsider wasn't hiding. By mid-morning, the headlines had taken over every major feed. Resort Air falsifies ownership transfer. Legal storm ahead. Quiet CEO walks out after dinner. Humiliation. Documents leak hours later. My face wasn't in most of the stories, but my name was, and that was enough. I pulled on a dark pantsuit and tied my hair up, not to impress, but to armor myself for what came next. Cynthia Raoul's office sat just beyond the historic district, tucked into an old converted bank building. When I walked in, she was already waiting in a sleek conference room, papers stacked, glasses on the bridge of her nose, posture upright like a woman who'd seen battles and lived to win them. She didn't say good morning, just nodded and slid a folder across the table. "Your father never signed the final transfer," she said. "His medical records from that week back it up. You were in London handling operations, and Elowen filed the paperwork without proper authorization. I opened the folder, the fake signature, the altered timestamps, the email trails. This isn't just morally wrong, Cynthia added. It's illegal. We're filing a quiet title action. And based on this, she tapped the page. The resort is already half yours, by law. I didn't smile. Not yet. How long until it's official? Depends. If they fight it, we could be looking at a year, but the board's already panicking, and Elowen's too loud. That works in our favor. I nodded, signed the last document. Let's make it official, I said quietly. She closed the folder with a crisp snap. We already did. Just as I stood to leave, the receptionist poked her head in. Sorry, there's a man here asking for Ms. Bell, says his name's Calder. I stiffened. Cynthia glanced at me. You want me to send him away? No, I'll speak with him. Out in the hallway, Calder looked nothing like the polished man who'd raised toasts the night before. His shirt was wrinkled, hair tousled, no blazer, no driver, just him, and that haunted look I hadn't seen since our father's funeral. I didn't know where else to go, he said, voice low. I doubt that, I answered. You've always had options, you just didn't like where they led. He rubbed his hands together. Belle, I need to say something I should have said years ago. I crossed my arms. I knew about the forged transfer, he said, finally meeting my eyes. I saw the documents. Elowen, she asked me to sign the second line, said it was just to smooth things over while Dad was sick, that she'd fix it later. I didn't want to fight her. You didn't want to lose her, I corrected. He didn't deny it. You wanted the illusion of family more than the truth, Calder, and now that illusion is collapsing. He looked like he'd been slapped, but he didn't protest, didn't beg. Just nodded, slowly, then stepped back. I'm sorry, he said, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook. Not yet. As I left the building and walked toward the parked car Cynthia had arranged, I spotted a small crowd gathering outside. Someone was live streaming. A woman I didn't recognize held up a handmade sign. You deserved better, we see you now. For a second, something warm cracked through the exhaustion. Just a flicker. But it stayed. By late afternoon, news had reached the board. Brian Landon, always the politician, never the loyalist, called an emergency meeting and issued a temporary suspension of all family members from executive roles, citing pending legal inquiries and reputational risk. Translation: Elowen had become a liability. Of course, she didn't take it quietly. That evening, her interview hit 3 stations in less than 2 hours. She sat in a blush-pink suit, dabbing fake tears, shaking her head. This is all so cruel, she said to the host. This was supposed to be the happiest week of my life. Belle is troubled. She's angry that she wasn't chosen, so she leaked fake documents. She wants to ruin my wedding, my legacy. But the comments told a different story. She walked out with grace. We've all been that ignored sister. This isn't about a wedding, it's about justice. Even the hashtags weren't kind to her. By 9 that night, I was back in my suite, finally out of my shoes, sipping peppermint tea with the TV off. The resort below still buzzed, but I was done watching, for now. Then, a knock at the door. No voice, just 2 soft raps. I opened it to find no one there, just a plain white envelope on the floor, no markings, no stamp. Inside, a faded photograph. My mother-in-law, younger, smiling, standing outside what looked like a notary's office, and beside it, folded with care, an old property deed. Her maiden name was typed at the top, and scribbled in ink along the bottom margin was one chilling line. She was never just a guest. She was always planning this. I sat back on the edge of the bed, the photo trembling slightly in my hand, because suddenly, the betrayal wasn't just Elowen's. It had started long before I married into this family. The name on the deed hit me like cold iron across the chest. Joanna M. Weatherby. Not Calder's mother. Not my mother-in-law. She had signed that land over 2 decades ago, long before I married into this family, long before anyone even knew my name. I sat still on the edge of the bed, the thin paper trembling in my hands. The signature looped perfectly, clean and practiced. There was no mistaking it. She hadn't married into the empire. She built it, quietly, patiently, from underneath. The picture enclosed with the document showed her much younger, standing in front of the undeveloped resort site. She was smiling faintly with a clipboard in hand and a hard hat slung over her shoulder. She was never just a guest. She was always calculating. I reached for my phone and texted Cynthia Raoul, my lawyer. "We need to talk now." Less than an hour later, I was dressed, armed with the document, and sitting in the passenger seat of Cynthia's car as we drove toward the county records building downtown. She didn't say much at first, just glanced down at the deed in my hands as we hit a red light. "Joanna M. Weatherby," she muttered. "That name's on at least 6 recorded transactions across the valley, mostly under Shellcore. But this one's personal." We parked behind the courthouse and headed inside. The records clerk, an older man with a sharp memory, perked up when Cynthia flashed her badge from the Bar Association. "Need to pull any premarital contracts filed under Calder Weatherby," she said, "and cross-reference any involving Belle Renard." He squinted at me. "Your name's on a few entries. Some are sealed. But there's one that was amended post-signature, about 18 years ago." We followed him to the back. He handed over a slim file with a sticky note that simply read, "Backdated." Cynthia flipped it open. Her jaw clenched. "It's a prenuptial," she said flatly. "Standard boilerplate at first glance. Mutual assets, inheritance exceptions. But this," she tapped a paragraph at the bottom. "This clause was added after the signatures. It limits your future claim to any jointly developed property, unless fraud is proven." She looked at me, no comfort in her tone. "This wasn't a wedding," she said. "It was a property transfer." I couldn't even argue. I had trusted Calder, trusted his mother's soft-spoken encouragement. All along, they were consolidating power, quietly locking doors I never saw closing. Cynthia made copies, filed a fraud challenge motion, and promised she'd loop in the resort board with an emergency request. I nodded numbly and stepped outside. I didn't want to call Calder, but I didn't have to. He was already waiting outside, leaning against his car. No driver this time, no blazer, just a wrinkled button-down and a face drawn tighter than I'd ever seen it. "You found it," he said. No preamble, just a whisper. "She signed land over before we were even married," I replied. "Held it in trust. For Elowen." He nodded slowly. "I confronted her this morning. She didn't even deny it, just said, 'You were always temporary, Calder. Elowen is family.'" He looked away, swallowing whatever remained of his pride. "I thought she was helping us," he said. "I thought she loved you." "She loved the illusion," I answered. "She needed someone to make Elowen's rise look earned." He let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm just a pawn, too?" I stared at him. "No, Calder, I think you're the one who let them move the pieces, because you were too scared to stop the game." There was nothing left to say. He didn't follow me as I walked away. By afternoon, the boardroom at the resort was packed. HOA reps, shareholders, a few reporters in the back, eyes sharp, cameras ready. I stood at the head of the long table and handed out copies of the deed, the altered prenuptial, and the county clerk's verification. Elowen's claim to sole authority over the Weatherby Resort is now under formal legal challenge, I began. Furthermore, this land deed shows that her mother was not merely a supportive figure, but an original asset holder who manipulated documents to consolidate power. Murmurs rose like low thunder. Mr. Killian Bragg, chair of the HOA, cleared his throat. "With this information," he said, "and 60% of current shareholder backing your position, you now hold interim operational authority until this challenge is resolved in court." The air shifted. Elowen, seated across from me in a crisp cream blazer, went rigid. Her jaw flexed. "This is a smear campaign," she spat. "She's trying to ruin my wedding week, my name, everything we've built." "I walked out of your wedding with nothing," I said quietly. "Everything you lost, you stole first." The flash of a camera startled her. Then another, and another. She stood, shaking, and stormed out without another word. It was late by the time I got back to my suite. The sunset had burned off long ago, and the hum of night traffic outside barely reached the windows. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand still shook a little. Then came the knock. No doorbell. No sound but the soft rustle of paper under the door. I walked over, picked up the envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Joanna, younger, standing with an older man in front of a courtroom. Behind it, folded carefully, was a copy of the original deed, signed 20 years ago. Her maiden name, and next to it, in slanted cursive, "She was never just a guest. She was always planning this." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "Belle," came her voice, smooth, controlled, chilling. "You think you've won? I built this empire before you were even born, and I can burn it to the ground before I hand it to you." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. "Then let's see who burns first." The line went dead, but in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about land. This was about legacy, lies, and the women who controlled them. The line went dead, but my breath stayed caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. I didn't move. Not yet. I stood there in the hallway of the resort's boardroom, still gripping the folder Cynthia had handed me hours earlier, feeling the imprint of 20 years of deception pulsing through every vein. It was Sunday morning, just past 7, and the air felt too quiet. The kind of quiet before a wave crashes. I walked back into my suite and dropped the folder on the desk, and that's when my phone started buzzing. Again, and again. Texts from unknown numbers, pings from staff I barely spoke to. A call from a local station I hadn't thought about in years. Then one name lit up the screen in bold letters. Wext News, Carla Monroe. I tapped the first link someone had sent me. There she was. My face, frozen in an unflattering screenshot, plastered across the screen beneath the title, "Caretaker turned gold digger? An inside look at the woman now running Silver Grove Resort." I didn't need to finish the rest of the segment, but I did. They aired it like it was gospel, chopped interviews from years ago, clips twisted into new meanings. They even used a blurry video of me escorting an elderly guest, only now it was narrated over with a voice saying, "Witnesses say she used her role as caretaker to seduce the late Mr. Merrick." My stomach turned. They didn't just lie, I muttered aloud. They built a new reality. I sat down, opened the resort's archive system, and began pulling footage, security logs, guest reports, emails, time-stamped videos. Every piece had a twin that contradicted their fantasy. Every twisted clip had a full version that told the truth. One by one, I dropped the files into a shared drive and sent them to Cynthia. Her reply came in 2 words. "We press." By noon, we were standing in the resort's grand ballroom, the one Eloan had once called her crown jewel. Journalists filled the seats, and cameras blinked like restless insects. I stepped to the podium. No makeup, no spin, just the documents and the truth. "You've seen the story that aired this morning," I said, voice steady. "Now let's see what they cut out." I played clip after clip, the same footage they used, but without the edits. There I was, helping a guest into their wheelchair. No whispering, no seduction, just me asking, "Would you like a water bottle for the ride back?" Then the staff complaints. I held up the formal dismissal letters. Each accusation had been investigated, each one found baseless. 2 of the signers were now working for Eloan. Finally, the pièce de résistance. I pulled up the employment contract for a former manager. On the final page, a signature. Joanna M. Weatherby. I turned back to the room. This is the same hiring she claimed I manipulated, the same one she approved, in writing, 4 years ago. The room buzzed. Carla Monroe raised her hand but said nothing. From the back, I heard someone shuffle forward. Calder. He hadn't spoken to me since the confrontation at the HOA meeting. Now he walked to the edge of the crowd, quiet but deliberate. "I have something to say," he said softly. I didn't stop him, not at first. He took the mic. "I was blind and weak. I let my mother tell me who to trust. I stood by while they rewrote the story to erase you." I looked at him. "You weren't weak," I said, interrupting. "You were silent. That's worse." I stepped down. He didn't follow. The conference ended. But the war didn't. Around 3 p.m., security called me. Alawan was being removed from the management suite. I watched the feed from my office. HOA board members stood with arms crossed. 2 uniformed guards approached Alawan as she clutched her bag, screaming at them, "You can't do this to me! This place is mine!" One of them calmly replied, "Not anymore." She looked up at the camera and pointed, "You'll regret this. You all will." I didn't flinch. An hour later, as the sun dipped low over the resort and the lobby began to empty of gawkers and reporters, Cynthia knocked on my office door. "There's a courier downstairs," she said, brows pinched. "Certified letter." I took it, peeled the seal slowly, filed officially under Weatherby versus Merrick. It was Joanna's counter-lawsuit. Accusations of mental distress, claims of hostile takeover, allegations that I'd destroyed the family's legacy with malicious intent. I handed the document back to Cynthia. "She's still playing house like this was ever about family," I said, voice quiet. Cynthia glanced at me, waiting. "Let her come," I said. "She built this place on lies." I turned toward the window, watching the orange glow of sunset spill across the lake. "I'll bury it with truth." The courtroom lights were harsh, but they were nothing compared to the eyes that had once dismissed me as invisible. They sat in neat rows. Joanna's attorney team, Alawan 2 seats behind them, and Calder, alone at the end. But I didn't look at any of them. Not directly. I kept my eyes forward, steady on the judge. Judge Marlowe adjusted his glasses, then gave a long sigh before signaling for Joanna's counsel to begin. They did, starting with shaky appeals to emotion, highlighting Joanna's fragile state and the mental duress caused by Bell's aggressive consolidation of power. A few people behind me shifted in their seats. One of the jurors looked away. It was clear. This wasn't going to land. Cynthia Raoul, seated calmly beside me, leaned in just slightly. "They're banking on pity," she whispered. "Let's give them truth." When it was her turn, Cynthia rose without a single piece of paper in hand. She walked slowly to the center of the courtroom and tapped the screen beside the witness box. "Your Honor, we'd like to present a sequence of bank records, wire transfers totaling $280,000, diverted from resort payroll into Ms. Joanna Vexley's personal investment fund. The account names have been obscured, but the routing numbers match her family trust filed under Vex JOH 3227. She paused just long enough for the courtroom to hold its breath. "That's not possible," Joanna's lawyer snapped. "There's no proof she controlled those transfers directly." Cynthia nodded. "Let's ask her daughter." A hush fell. Alawan looked up sharply, her name having been summoned like a spell she wasn't prepared for. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Alawan Vexley, please approach the stand." Her shoes clicked against the floor like time counting down. She climbed the steps slowly, every inch of her suddenly not so camera-ready. After the oath, Cynthia didn't hesitate. "Were you asked by your mother to initiate an internal smear campaign against Ms. Bell, including falsified reports and anonymous complaints?" Alawan's eyes darted toward her mother. Joanna didn't move, didn't blink. Alawan faltered, then steadied herself with a breath. "She said I had to get Bell out. She said the resort would be ours again if I did." The courtroom was silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Joanna's team slumped visibly. One of the jurors covered her mouth. Judge Marlowe called for a brief recess, but we all knew. The verdict was already forming. By late afternoon, we reconvened. Judge Marlowe cleared his throat. After reviewing the testimony and evidence provided, this court rules in favor of the defendant, Ms. Bell Marin. Full ownership of the Carradine Resort is hereby upheld. The countersuit is dismissed with prejudice. Court is adjourned. I felt nothing at first. No relief, no joy. Just silence. Reporters swarmed as I exited. Joanna tried to duck out a side hallway, but cameras caught her expression, tight-lipped, head down. I didn't offer her a word. Just walked past, straight into the SUV waiting for me. The door shut behind me with a soft click, and only then did I exhale. 2 hours later, I was back in my office at the resort, slipping off my heels when the front desk patched a call through to my line. Cynthia answered it first, then looked at me. "It's Harold Ellison. He says it's urgent." I picked up. "Mr. Ellison?" "Ms. Marin," he replied, calm and measured. "I believe it's time we spoke about Mr. Carradine's final estate instructions. He left something for you, something outside of public record." I stood slowly. "Go on." "Before his passing, Mr. Carradine amended his private holdings file. He instructed that if any member of his family attempted to undermine your position, you were to be granted full executive control over not just the Carradine Resort, but every affiliated property, hotels, spas, and estates across 3 states. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Harold continued. "He said, if they ever turn on her, this is her shield." I thanked him and hung up. The sun was low when I walked back to the main building and up to the rooftop restaurant. The old family dining space had been shuttered since the mess began, but tonight I had it reopened. The staff who'd stayed through the chaos were already there: Maria from housekeeping, George from landscaping, and the elderly couple who once defended me during that disaster of a fundraiser years ago. Their eyes lit up when I stepped in. Platters were passed, laughter started up like it had never left. The table was full, except for one seat, the one Joanna used to occupy every holiday. It stayed empty. At one point, one of the waiters leaned over and asked softly, "Will the family be joining?" I looked around the room, at the faces who had stuck with me, believed me, fought for me. "They're not family," I said, setting my glass down. "You are." Later that night, I stood at the far end of the rooftop, watching the glow of the city in the distance. Behind me, I could hear laughter and forks tapping gently against porcelain, and I thought about all the noise that had once tried to drown me out. But in the end, silence had been louder. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't throw a single stone. I just walked, steadily, quietly, through every fire they lit and built something they could no longer sit at. Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence. No rage, no spectacle, just walking away, while they watch everything they once held collapse, without you. And sometimes, the table you rebuild has no space left for the ones who broke it.